I think Mike touched on this slide here, talking a bit about relevancy and value today. So just to kind of move it forward, one of the things that we wanted to bring Andressa back for was to really talk about how, you know, how we can shift the landscape today. So, our commercial strategy team, we're not talking about in terms of, the marketing team, the sales team, the revenue team. We're really trying to bring everyone together, same team working for the same goal. That said, the quarterbacks in marketing, get spread a little thin sometimes. And, I think that, we have marketing strategies, but we get distracted from, that long-term goal sometimes of, driving EBITDA growth for our hotels, by, responding to sort of immediate needs, or sometimes getting, diverted down, a path of creative or something like that. So I thought maybe Andressa could chat a little bit more with us about this, because I think she's really lived this experience.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I think from a property level marketing perspective, we end up getting sort of bifurcated sometimes in the initiatives, where we have usually someone handling creative, whether that is and the storytelling sort of aspect of marketing, whether that's our social media posts, graphic design, the PR efforts sometimes. And then we end up with, a separate effort that goes into media and the budget spend, and more of, reaching people to try to hit direct revenue. And so what ends up happening there is, because we end up sort of splitting that effort, sometimes we don't really get to understand the user's path to purchase, from storytelling and inspiration and ideation to actually conversion. And so in the middle of that, what ends up happening is we end up wasting a lot of time, both in marketing and revenue management, sales, really across everyone who kind of makes up that commercial team. And then we end up wasting a lot of budget too. So the idea behind going into relevancy and value today is kind of figuring out, as a complete team, what can we be doing to keeping this from happening, from actually kind of understanding how is our storytelling and our ideation, how are we getting most efficiently from that point of like top of the funnel down to conversion, and making it more of a holistic effort from the commercial strategy point of view.
Awesome. So, let's talk a little bit about some of these terms. I want to define a few of these things and just kind of give us some high level concepts, so that you guys kind of understand, all of the ingredients as we start to look a little bit deeper at, how relevancy and value come into the buyer journey, where they intersect, and how we can use them the most effectively. And I think that, just to kind of define it, relevancy is really, we're addressing the what's in it for me for the guest, not what's in it for me for the hotel. But we really want to have that customer-centric mindset. And it's also too, it's tied to a specific goal. And I think that, what is relevant at different points in the buyer journey, may have different goals. And we're going to introduce you to a few of those today. And then the value, is really about how do we address, depending on, what is relevant, how do we address the value beyond just price alone? Because, if you think about, you've all seen marketing messages where, they're sending you an offer, and it might be a high value offer, but it's not relevant to you right now. So you're not going to convert, the desired action's not going to happen. Conversely, you could have a very relevant message, that's, very timely perhaps, but if the value to the customer isn't there, again, the desired action's not going to come. So, we really want to focus on how we can tie these two together to get to sort of more of a mastery level of commercial strategy, and really advance our goals more quickly and spin that flywheel. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of relevance for, basically, this is our B2C audience. So, our transient guests. So, direct relevance is something that I think all of us, this is where we spend a lot of our time. It's offering what the user asks for. We're assuming that they know about our product or property or what we're offering, and they're looking for that directly. So I think, this is where, from a commercial strategy perspective, a lot of hotels understand this very well, and spend a fair bit of time in that area. These other ones, indirect relevancy is really, it's inferred based on what a user's asking for. So it ties more deeply into the why. So the messaging of an indirect message is more targeting, what is it that they're looking for? And it's not just, I'm looking for a hotel, but am I looking to get away? What's my true intent or the true rationale? Is it a deeper connection, a sense of adventure? And so you're sort of hitting them in that ideation stage, if you will, with something that is relevant to the why. So it's not, we're not making an assumption that they know about us or that they're searching for us. They're searching for something like us. And then the contextual relevancy, from a messaging perspective, really is helping them understand why you may be a good fit. So, what is it that you offer, and why would that matter to them? So it's helping them better understand, your product or what it is that you have on offer. And then the final piece is the comparative, which, really just looks at, if they have a strong understanding of something else, how do you differ, or how do you, give yourself a competitive advantage, helping them really understand what makes you unique, specifically in reference to someone else. And so Andressa made an interesting point earlier, sort of talking about relevancy, what that looks like in terms of the messaging. Do you want to touch on that, Andressa?
Yeah, I think, as we look at the different types of relevancy right now, we are more familiar with direct. And a lot of times, the media effort and the dollars that we put behind trying to reach guests reflects that we are looking for people who are in this direct space, right? But these are going to be people who they know about us, and they've already searched for us. They know something about us. So when we think about brand PPC, when we think about retargeting efforts, all of those are people who are already familiar with this. And a lot of those efforts are the ones that actually drive a high ROI, but it's only because they're already familiar with this. So what the heart of what we're really wanting to get to today is kind of understanding how can we reach people in these different areas of relevancy that are not necessarily already at the bottom of the purchase funnel. So that's what we want to talk through today.
Awesome. So another concept that we want to kind of look at and is we wanted to introduce you to this idea of permissible travel. And this is something that I think is really relevant based on what's going on, today with the travel scape. But I think this is something that's going to, crop up in varying degrees and varying permutations with varying levels of severity, or impact all the way through the next year or so. So the idea of permissible travel is, something that would, hold someone back from making a travel decision or making a conversion, making a booking, for factors that you as a hotelier can't overcome. And we sort of saw this as being, there's three factors. One is traveler confidence. And, Mike shared a stat with us recently, that came from MMGY, that said 68% of people feel comfortable traveling in their cars. But the reality of it is that means, a third of the population is scared to travel in their cars. So, when you start to look at that and the bigness of that, that's pretty substantial. And, when we think of cars, it's our own environment, it's our own germs, it's my own cesspool, but really, the risk to us in traveling in our own cars from, a COVID-19 perspective is actually fairly low, but, 30% of people are afraid to do that. So that's going to impact their ability, even if you're looking at a drive market, that could impact their ability to make a conversion, even if they want to stay at your hotel and you're the best fit for them and your price is right. The other piece of it is authority permission. So, maybe the state or the county or the city is, restricting travel for, any variety of reasons, or they're not necessarily restricting travel, but maybe they're restricting the operation of certain demand drivers or destination amenities or activities that make a difference to your guests when they're with you. So the piece of what can I do while I'm there is actually quite relevant and important as well. So that's going to be a factor in everything might look right, but if I can't do what I want to do when I'm there, or it's going to be, the experience is going to look materially very different than it did before, or materially very different than what I know and love, that's going to impact my decision to move forward and make a commitment to book. And the last piece of it is something Andressa had introduced, and I didn't really think of this one at first, but the social perception of, if I'm going on a trip, what do my peers, my friends, my colleagues, what does my social circle think of that, and how will I be perceived, in that population for going on a trip? Are they going to shame me because it's risky, or what's the impact there? So, I think people have all of these different factors that are affecting them, in that booking continuum that wasn't there before. So we kind of wanted to sum them up as permissible travel, because it is either a speed bump or roadblock to conversion, in the most traditional sense right now. And Justin, did you have anything else that you want to touch on that?
No, I think just to reiterate, a lot of people when they're considering and trying to decide on whether or not they should take a trip, finances definitely play a role for a lot of people. Time, whether or not they can take time off. I think when we look at all of these sort of added barriers that we have right now to people pulling the trigger, I think these are considerations that we need to make sure that we're making in terms of, you know, measuring how effective the marketing is being right now and what our goals are with the marketing. So, and I know we'll get into that.
Absolutely. So I wanted to introduce our guest journey, and there's a number of different things going on this slide, but I think the important thing to point out is we've tried to simplify it for the purpose of this lesson, but it is not nearly as linear as it is. There are a lot of disruptors for the guest along this journey, and there's a lot of competition. So there are a lot of places that people can get lost, and there are a lot of different permutations of how this journey can look. But we wanted to sort of talk about where in tradition, sort of in our more traditional, recent past, we spent a lot of time, I think, as commercial strategists in this property research and consideration phase. And this is where a tremendous amount of our effort was focused. And so, from a guest journey perspective, I should touch on, the guest actions are really these ones here in the, focal blue. And then the hotel actions are these orange ones here. And, we're moving them down this continuum of getting them to booking. But we were traditionally focused in this sort of myopic space, and what that looked like was assuming that people were aware of our property and wanted to come to us and were doing brand searches, or they were already we were getting enough of that business to meet our financial goals, because we had a diversified portfolio of business. We had group, we had corporate, we had incentive, we had all of these other markets that were performing for us but have been impacted in different ways. And so this is also where I think we focused a lot of our traditional retargeting efforts. And, when we look at these retargeting efforts, a lot of those, yielded substantial results for us. We were often very successful in our retargeting campaigns because of the fact that people could travel freely and make those decisions. And we found a really good cadence that was working very well for us. I think that our, this notion or this concept of permissible travel is a speed bump now in getting people to that conversion because of how they're feeling overall. And so that is potentially going to start to affect how those metrics look to us, and maybe have us questioning whether those campaigns are as effective as they were before. And it may be that the campaigns are not. It's not that the campaigns aren't being effective. It's just that the traveler can't make the conversion even if they want to. So maybe we need to start to reframe. How do we still get that capture in their mind? So we can talk a little bit more about the tactics around that as we move forward. But what I really want to focus on is, this concept that we introduced last week, which was the opportunity to farm demand. And that's really to get in front of the travelers, a lot earlier at the top of the funnel in that, that ideation phase when they're looking at destination research and really thinking about where they could go. Because I think that their behavior in this right now is very different than it's ever been before. And I think that the opportunity to get in front of them and to start to farm that demand and move them through this continuum is pretty substantial. Andressa, did you want to talk a little bit about that part of the guest journey and what that sort of can look like for them?
Yeah, I think in terms of ideation and destination research, I think we had the start of I call it the top of the sales funnel is when we look at the channels, and we'll talk a little bit about distribution. When we look at how do we reach these people, the idea is that our marketing dollars should be used to drive both reach, and we're really looking at more qualified reach for the audience who's most likely to stay with us, through conversion. And in ideation, the destination research, and the awareness phases, a lot of this is driven by the I'll say everything except the direct relevancy. It's tied to that, and so we have channels that do a better job of reaching and um, accomplishing these goals, but they don't necessarily drive the higher ROI. It's not to say that we shouldn't be spending on them. We absolutely should, because these are the initiatives that get people through into the consideration stage at the outset. But because they don't generate a high ROI, we tend to neglect this part of the sales funnel completely. So a lot of what we're going to be talking today about is, really looking at what are all of the channels available to us, and how do we use those with specific messaging to push people from the ideation stage really efficiently through the consideration and conversion stage.
Yeah, Dresden, I think you make a really good point there about why, traditionally maybe we haven't invested in some of these areas as much as we could be, right? And I think it really, it comes down to, when you talk about the ROI, it's really the modeling of that ROI and the way that we've completed that calculation in the past. So it's not that there is a lower return to some of these initiatives, or no return to some of these initiatives. It's really that, oftentimes we're using a last click attribution model, or, an attribution model with a very short window, right? And as a result, maybe some of the stats around the ideation and the research and the awareness phases aren't included in those conversions that we're counting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as commercial strategists, I think where we're trying to go with this is really encouraging you to look at, what is the impact, or what is the goal at each stage of this buyer journey, and how do we start to articulate and discuss this in a more granular level as we start to cultivate this farm of demand that we're creating for our properties. So I think this is where right now we're being held up by this notion of permissible travel, and there's maybe an opportunity for us to start to look at creative ways to identify that, if they can't make a reservation, is there a different type of conversion that we can be doing, or different types of goals that we want to be tracking that are showing us intent, or maybe signals that we will get a conversion in the future once they feel like they're able to make that commitment to us. I think the other piece of it is, we also too, because there are so many different phases here, there is an opportunity to, really hone in on our messaging and hedge a lot of different bets to start to see what's working, so that we can very quickly redeploy resources, or reallocate resources to what is working, and to be learning from that, because we haven't maybe traditionally played a lot in this front part of the front top of funnel area, but that's something that we need to learn more about, and the time, we have some time to do that right now, and so we want to be focusing on that and really starting to learn from it. Does that make sense to everyone so far? So I wanted to introduce this concept of campaigns here. And we spent a lot of time, sort of on this just before this call, working through this. And I think that, this is where, from a commercial strategy perspective, we wanted to, bring you guys into how you look at your campaigns and what you're doing with them. So, you can really start to look, at what is going to make the biggest impact. How are we adding value? How are we relevant? And what are some of the tactics that we're doing to support that? So, really pushing towards this EBITDA goal, or this goal of EBITDA growth. But, in here, there are going to be goals at each step along this process. And I think it's really important that we begin to work through some of these and start to, look at them in a little bit more depth. So I wanted to bring over an example for you. And I think that this is something that we can talk through a little bit more. We're in this example, we're just going to take, domestic family travel. And we've started to fill in the different parts of this matrix. So if you think about your property, and Andressa made an interesting point earlier too about, people can enter this at different phases, but it's really important that we get in the mindset of, you know, who is the customer and, what mindset are they in, and so that we're catering to them with the relevant message at the right time. And I think that, traditionally, when we look at some of our own channels, like our email marketing or our databases, we've done a sort of a spray and pray approach without really considering, where is this where is this buyer in the stage, and then how do we really start to refine this to make the process, compelling for them, and make a lot of sense. So why don't we start out here? Andressa, do you want to touch on this sort of this first section here, sort of who, where would we start with this process in commercial strategy? Why would we go to this? Where would our entrance point be that we would start to embark on an exercise like this?
Sure. And the first thing I'll say is that it's so interesting when we did this exercise. When you do it all the time, it becomes so intuitive. But when you actually have to like put it down on paper, we really had to think through it. And it's an important exercise to do because it just makes sure that you're hitting everyone, that you have an opportunity to reach everyone with the right messaging at the right time to push people through efficiently. So when we take a look at domestic family travel, and we say, okay, we're assuming here that we're a resort in San Diego, a family-friendly resort in San Diego. The very first step of this that we could potentially catch people would be an ideation, like a family that's wanting to just have a fun family vacation, right? So the messaging at that point would be about having a fun family vacation. Now, we could take a look at all of the different channels that we have available to us, but when we really look at, what channels make the most sense to achieve this reach, that's where we kind of think about, okay, PR, public relations, is one of those initiatives that helps us drive a lot of reach, in addition to our referral network, and then our CVBs and partnerships that we have with like DMOs, CVBs. So, but the goal with that is to like inspire travel. Like we want people to get inspired and think about the experience, the getaway, the escapism, the time together, and what the benefits are going to be to them. I don't know, Daniel, I don't know how much you want me to go through each of these steps.
Yeah, well, why don't we sort of go through the exercise, and I think that for me, when I started to really dive into the exercise, I started to see how the different mechanics of the commercial strategy team were going to work together. And I think that, you know, an example like this, it could be, you could use something like this, where you've identified, hey, we have a gap in December and we really need to start to look at who could fill that gap. How many travelers would they, how much revenue do we need? What would the travelers be that would fill that gap? Or, you could be using this to sort of look at your summer this year and say, hey, our summer is going to look materially very different than it has in the past. And so where are we, what customer segments are we going to be going after to start to try and drive or farm that demand for ourselves? And so, we've talked a little bit about, what can you look to try and, gain that exposure. And so you've probably got an idea of the persona of the guest that you think that you want to be going after, and this framework is really the sort of the toolkit that is meant to help guide you through. Okay, so if we're going to go after that customer, we've identified who they are. We've got a sense of how we're going to gain that exposure, but this is really help figure out how do we actually really move that buyer through the journey and push them through that funnel, or let them guide themselves through that funnel. So from a top line perspective, we've got our different buckets, if you want to call them that, here, of where your mindset of where the customer is. And in some cases, you might have customers that are already aware of you, or, if you're talking about your customers that you know and love, you might be skipping some of these stages at the front end because it's not relevant for that customer. If you're thinking about your email database of the people that are, have come to your resort year after year after year, same week in August with their family, they're probably not going to do a lot of research. There's probably not a lot of consideration. They might be, checking you out, see what's new, what's on the menu. I hope you didn't take the, the coconut fried shrimp off. Those are my favorite. But, things like that, they might be entering the journey here. So your messaging and relevancy and that piece of it is going to be a little bit different. But when we look back, and I think that we're really focusing on this example, and the use case or business case for this example is really when we're starting back up here and we're going after, a new customer that we previously haven't had to engage with, and we haven't, maybe interacted with them in the past, but because we don't unfortunately have the 50% group mix we used to have at a resort, now we're starting to go look for this family traveler that we never previously used to chase. So in this case, we're saying, hey, these people maybe aren't in our database yet, but they're looking for somewhere to go. And so the first thing is, we need to start to find these people when they're in that ideation phase. So really thinking about, what is it that I want to do? What am I looking for? Am I looking to, get away? Am I looking for a specific experience? And in this case, this family, they're probably looking for, something fun to do. And so that's really what our messaging is about. It's just really starting with that, what do we have, to do here? And I think there's an opportunity from a distribution perspective. And this is, I'll clarify, this is a marketing distribution. So, where we're going to put this type of content to reach this type of consumer, there's an opportunity in PR and social, or in, partnerships with your CBB. So these are maybe where, people aren't set on a specific destination yet, but they're looking for somewhere to go, and they might be considering multiple destinations as possibilities. So, do you want to touch a little bit on the messaging and how that, you might leverage that with your PR agency at this point, and what some of the things you might need to do are?
Yeah, I think if it depends on if you are looking at your message being fun family travel, look at and have your PR team help you develop ways that you can reach publications and media outlets that kind of talk to um, fun family travel in San Diego and what you have to offer, right? And why that might be the best thing for you right now. I think in terms of um, in terms of ideation, you want people getting excited about what San Diego has to offer as a destination. And so once they're excited about family travel, you get them excited about San Diego, and then you just sort of work through narrowing it down to where they understand that you're the best fit for them, for the type of experience that you want to have. And so by doing that, by working through your distribution channels, you're able to actually use them most effectively and use your budget most efficiently to communicate those different messages to push them down the sales funnel.
And I love that point, Andressa. I think, what might really be helpful is, let's just go step by step through this. I like the way you set up ideation a few minutes ago. And really with the intent of, the goal in each of these stages being to, get the customer to move to the next stage. Can you just kind of walk us through, similar to how you did with ideation a few minutes ago, the destination research, awareness, property research, and consideration sides?
Sure. When you're looking at destination research, you're trying to help them understand why they want to commit to San Diego, and so that's where we look at. We can look at our social channels. That's going to drive a lot of awareness of what San Diego has to offer and how we fit into that landscape. Email marketing and SEO are really good ways to reach people too when they're in sort of this. They've moved from ideation to more of I want to learn more about what San Diego has to offer, and you being that channel to kind of say, this is what San Diego looks like to us through our eyes, kind of helps them see why San Diego might be a good opportunity for them, right? And so within that, you can kind of tell them, look, we are easily accessible. These are all of the activities that you can do while you're here. And at the same time, we're really affordable for families, right? So that's sort of the value that you're trying to drive with the messaging in the destination research phase.
Awesome.
And they may not have even hit your hotel website at this point. I mean, they might just still be interacting out in out in social media, or, maybe they've got they've got the seed planted that, San Diego could be a good option for them, but they may not have even got to being aware of your property yet, correct?
Right. Right. And I think that that's where it speaks to, being so active outside of just our website, outside of just the OTAs, outside of just, our email marketing in our sphere, and why partnerships and PR are such big parts of what we should be doing to help generate that awareness for sure.
Absolutely. And on the SEO front too, if you look at some of the changes that have happened with Google of late, right, and the move to long tail searches where whether it be a voice-based search or a question that somebody's typing into the search engine, right? A lot of people now during this destination research phase are actually asking Google a question as opposed to Googling San Diego activities or San Diego hotels, right? So I've seen a lot of hotels move towards like FAQ pages that really allow you to optimize for the search engines with those long tail keyword searches, right? So I think there's some opportunities to look into that from a hotel perspective that maybe have been typically underutilized as well. And it's it's promoting your hotel, but then it's also really promoting the destination on that page. So that way you can play a part in helping to drive people to San Diego in addition to your hotel.
Right. Yeah. The all boats rising philosophy,
Yeah.
right? Um, so beyond that, when you get them into understanding why San Diego might be a good destination for them in this scenario, then you turn to awareness, and within the larger destination of San Diego, why you would be a good fit for them. And so that's where when they've already determined San Diego, they've already determined their destination, then that's where we have some of the other efforts coming in, like non-brand PPCs and paid social. That's where we can really kind of say, okay, these people are already pretty qualified that they want to come to San Diego for a family vacation. We think they would be a good fit for our property. So we can start putting some dollars behind digital media, maybe prospecting ads, paid social, non-brand PPC, in the attempt to get shortlisted. That's what we're going for. Among all of the resorts that they could go for in the area, in the destination, we want to be in that short list, right? So the value to them is going to be in the USPs that we talk about here, and that gets us over to why us in the property search. Once we're in the short list, the next phase is kind of moving them through, why are we the best option for you? And that's going to be a lot of, now they already know our name, right? So we can do retargeting, we can do email marketing. They've already been on our website. They're doing some more discovery about who we are. So again, this is where you can see how far they've come through, I'm going to call it the sales funnel. And this is where brand PPC and retargeting, we're just starting to see it because they know our name now. But if we only focused on these high ROI initiatives, we would have missed all of this opportunity at the start of the funnel. Just kind of bringing that point back home. The idea here is that in this phase, we want them to choose us over the other hotels and resorts in the considerations set. So with the value to them here is going to be that they can do specific activities or get specific experiences at our hotel and find the value at our hotel versus the others. From there, yep.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, and I think that, something that's important to recognize too is, in this awareness and consideration stage is, where they're becoming aware of us and where they're doing that research, it may not necessarily always be on our channels or our favorite channels.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we're making sure that we're optimizing, our messaging as much as we can across the, third party channels as well. Some people, I think when you look at the journey from, destination research to awareness to even considering a property as a candidate for your shortlist, some people may not, be going, to, just organic search. They may be going to a TripAdvisor and just sorting, top family friendly resorts and things like that. So you want to also to make sure that the profile that you have on, sites like TripAdvisor or, your listings on your OTA, within the constraints of those profiles, that, that messaging is helping to, convey what you are as much as you can within the constraints of what that channel allows.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really why we should be kicking on all cylinders across all of anywhere we operate digitally, is that people could come in and learn about us on any of these channels, and we could be relying on channels that perhaps we don't have as much control over to help push them through to the next phase. So wherever we have an opportunity and it's in our control to push them through, we want to make sure that we're optimizing that opportunity as much as possible. Um, I think, once we've hit consideration, it's where, they may need a family friendly offer to help push them over to conversion, because conversion is our ultimate goal at this point. We've already gone through, I'm looking for this type of experience. I've decided I want to do it in San Diego. I've decided that I want a good family friendly resort. That's what I'm looking for. This is the property out of this list of properties that I've been considering. And so what do we need to do to kind of push them over to conversion? And the idea is that once we get the booking, like, we want to leave them with the sense that, we've inspired confidence that they've made the right decision in spending their money with us. We want to get them excited about their trip coming up. Um, so when we get on the other side of conversion, the permissible travel is the big question mark in here at the moment, right? This is the thing that, after all of this work, it could actually delay the actual conversion. And so we wanted to make sure that we were putting this in as a reminder to everyone that this is sort of the speed bump that we have right now. But once we're able to make that conversion, we really just want people to get excited, and we can communicate with them through email primarily, and even do voice outreach. You could have reservations agents call them to, secure dining reservations, to, talk about, like, what all of the things they can do on their trip coming up to really reinforce, you guys are going to have a great time when you're here. We're really excited about you coming. And then, with the ultimate goal of the value being to the user, is to have an amazing experience at your property. So, and again, this is sort of like the full example, the broader picture of just one example. Not every guest is going to come in at the ideation stage. But in terms of what it could possibly be, and what are all of the different ways that we could reach a guest to get them from, I think this could be a potential option for me, down to actual booking. This gives a good example of the different decisions that they're making along the way, and how our messaging could change to actually accomplish that and get them through the
I
funnel.
think Yeah, and I think that you know, when we start to look at this too, we start to look at the goals. And I think that because, we see here that there's actually a number of different stages, and, the goal at each stage is very different. And so I think that, from a commercial strategy perspective, I think, from a reporting perspective, we've always really focused on, what was our pickup? How much did we convert? But we may be, in our commercial strategy meetings, and when we're looking at our overall efforts, maybe we haven't necessarily considered what some of these goals were as a team, or these micro goals along this continuum. But maybe those have been, sort of isolated, or that information has maybe held, sort of in, not necessarily saying in the marketing silo, but not everyone was really maybe aware of, or maybe on board with some of the ideas of what these micro goals could be. And so, because we were very focused on conversion, and I think there is an opportunity for us as commercial strategists to start to surface this conversation now, because we may be being very successful from a commercial strategy perspective, moving through areas of this, but we may be hitting a roadblock here. So we're not seeing it in the traditional metric that we maybe always looked at. And some of these different ways you can start to look at this is, destination awareness, or destination research to awareness, is starting to understand, am I getting new traffic? Or, you're going to want to start to look at, if you had a PR opportunity that you were placed in, what did it drive? How was that in terms of referral traffic? Or, are you using media monitoring to understand, what the impact of that was? Or, in the property research phase, how long are people spending on your website? How much of your content are they consuming? And maybe at that point, you know, is there something that you can do to offer them a conversion opportunity that's not necessarily related to making a booking, because they haven't checked this permissible travel box, but, do we have an opportunity to convert them, into, an email sign up, or, a new social media follower, or, in a different way, and to engage that, and, start to track that conversion metric as, as a return. I mean, it isn't, it's an ROI metric. It's not in term, not, maybe traditionally in terms of, money in equals money out. But there's value there if we're successful in moving them through that pipeline.
Yeah, and I think we can look at it in terms of, not necessarily ROI for individual channels, but like, ROI for the business objective. Like these were all the dollars that we spent to accomplish this business objective, this measurable business objective. Was the money that we spent worth it? And is there a way that we can make it more efficient moving forward? I would also say that this is a really good exercise for hotels to be doing right now, simply too, because we have a lot of hotels and markets are changing right now. And the amenities that we have to offer, experiences that we have to offer, the experiences that our markets have to offer right now, are going to be, for each market and each hotel, it's going to be different, but it may not look the same as it did, and your value proposition as a property may not look the same as it did before all of this happened. So I think kind of making sure that you're understanding that, what your messaging was before at each of these opportunities may not look the same now, and may not look the same 3 months from now, right? So going through the exercise, kind of knowing that, and being able to adjust as you go per campaign, depending on what's happening with your hotel, what's happening with your market, is only going to be able to help you to go to market faster with your message.
And Andres, I think you touched on some really good points around the measurement of this as well, right? And what are some of those metrics that you should be considering? I think today, to your point, most hotels are so focused on that conversion event, right? So go back to your digital agency partners and really have the conversation with them, right? To understand, okay, we want to help guide customers through this process. What would you recommend as being the proper metrics to really gauge our success, right? And I think that starts to open the dialogue and the conversation to where you can get even more strategic with your digital agency partners than maybe you are today.
Absolutely. And even your PR partners as well. We tend to say, okay, we have PR, we want to be in travel and leisure, we want to be in Condé Nast. We have these really broad, top line luxury publications that everybody wants to be in, that are amazing. But when it kind of comes down to driving revenue, awareness, and conversion among a more targeted guest for our property and our needs, just given our business challenges, where does it make most sense for us to put our efforts?
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing too is really, I look at this, and we've talked a lot about repeatable success and learning. And I think that, some of these strategies that we're employing, the benchmarks that we have in our own data, or the successes that we've had, might look very different now. So, Andressa, if you were starting to test out some of these things, how would you track that? Do you have some recommendations around how to, maybe archive that, or, what some of those things that, you as a marketer, would sort of use as resources to, say, hey, how good was that campaign really? Or, how do we, how do we go back and look at some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think you, like for email marketing, you have certain benchmarks, right, that you're looking for in terms of open rates, click-through rates. So it's easy to sort of, it's a little bit easier with some of these distribution channels to kind of measure success. But then equally, I think some of them are a little more, like you can give your PR agency and your digital agency, well, like for PR, you can give them a certain amount of hits that you want to get, a certain amount of impressions that you want to get. So some of it's going to be a little bit more, how much reach did we drive, and trying to drive reach goals versus driving conversion goals. I think too, you should be going for smaller wins at this point too, knowing that we're not going to get a lot of conversion. Um, collecting email addresses is a really good kind of smaller goal to go for right now, and people who are signing up for eClub to get more information. If we've done a really good job of driving awareness among a set of people who are qualified, who may want to stay, but they're not yet ready to book, but they want to get more information from us, or they want to start following us, I think email signups, engagement, and increasing your followers are, again, really good measurements to kind of see how well are we doing with our reach among a qualified audience who is more likely to stay with us in the future.
Yeah. The other piece of it is, I think connecting some of the different mechanisms, or the distribution mechanisms to support each other. So, if we're, say for example, we're using email to hit people who, were already our customer and know and love us, is there anything we can do to better support, a multifaceted campaign to drive better results?
You mean yeah, I mean, I think integrated campaigns are always the way to go. So if you're trying to accomplish a business goal, um, kicking on, like using the channels that you need to use, and being consistent with your messaging, given the right appropriate stage of awareness is always better than just kind of doing different messages one off, assuming that you're trying to hit the same goal.
Yeah. And Mike touched on an interesting opportunity earlier with social. And Mike, I don't know if you maybe want to speak to that a bit more, but you had mentioned the opportunity and just the vast amount of data that's available there, and something we could maybe potentially tap into as hoteliers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the granularity in targeting is higher than it's ever been from a social perspective, right? So I think some of the channels that I really take a close look at are, Facebook, Instagram. Obviously, it's all part of the Facebook platform, and then YouTube as well, right? And you can get very tailored beyond just the demographic standpoint and really start to look into behavioral characteristics, right? So if you have an audience that's engaged with the property in the past, or that's converted with your property in the past, you can really use those people to really start to build out this behavioral style list. And it's not necessarily you sitting down and saying, I want these behavioral characteristics, right? But you can actually even upload lists into Facebook right now that can be used to build out a lookalike audience that interact and engage the way that is similar to prior customers that you've had. I think oftentimes I like to take a look at the political space and, right, wrong, or indifferent in terms of the current political climate, right? You look at the way that elections have evolved over the past few years, and I think it's really become clear that social targeting piece is something that has the ability to sway consumer behavior, right? So right now they're looking a lot at video targeting, and YouTube being a great example. And you can actually go through and set up advertising strategies based on different accounts that people may be following, or different profiles that they have on YouTube. So how great would it be, for example, to set up an advertisement around your CVB channel? So if you have a strong CVB that has a strong YouTube channel and is getting more and more volume from people visiting to take a look at what that destination has to offer, you can actually advertise on some of those channels. And traditionally, some of that has looked pretty pricey, but I think when you start to consider the value of the leads and the higher propensity to convert, I definitely think it's worth a close look.
Yeah. And two, a lot of that can just be homegrown. A lot of that is targeting that you can do for new acquisition that could be done on site. I'm not advocating that everybody get rid of their digital agencies. I'm just saying we have more opportunities to be more self-sufficient now than ever before.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important that you understand what some of those opportunities are, so that you can also, ask your agency about them and understand, where should they be focused and where should you be focused? Because I think that, understanding what can be DIY and what probably maybe shouldn't be DIY if you don't know what you're doing. There's a reason I would never probably try and build a house. But, so I think it's being realistic. And also too, I think for, for this exercise and for this example, you could do this for 10, 20, 30, 40 different types of customer segments. You want to do this to focus on the ones that are going to add the most value for your property. So what's really going to support your EBITDA goals, and where you could get the most bang for your buck, because you could get down this is a big rabbit hole, and there's quite a number of different fields on here, and when you start to break down all of the distribution channels, it starts to become really big and overwhelming. And so I think it's really important that you start with the things that are going to drive the most value, and really don't lose sight of that EBITDA goal, because if you think about it, that EBITDA continuum is really down at the bottom here, and every time we're moving people over here, we may lose some here, we may have someone come in, but we want to be focusing on really moving towards that continuum, and learning at each of these stages, because that's really what the flywheel is about, is starting to use that use these micro goals to test and refine. And then when you're testing and refining those and reallocating resources based on your learnings, that's the situation when you're really starting to accelerate that flywheel and treat this as an accelerant, as opposed to decelerating that process by being caught up in the bigness of it. So sometimes it's important to just move forward swiftly and get to progress, so that you are attacking it, as opposed to just not touching it at all because you're trying to get it to perfect. So I think we're coming up on the top of the hour here. So I wanted to just kind of sum it up so we had a moment for questions. So I think we've talked a lot about, exposure, and then looking at how do we bring that relevancy and value together, and how do we really bring that home for everyone, and really make it about that customer and make that flywheel spin. Did we have any questions from the audience, Mike?
I'm not seeing a lot. I think a lot of people are just kind of trying to absorb the concept. What I would encourage people to do is, we'll have a homework or a reference piece attached to this about that framework, and would love to
Yeah.
just get your feedback or your questions as you start to work through that, because I think it is, it's really important to develop that clarity now about the type of audiences you should be targeting and the most effective way to target those individual stages. Because coming out of this thing, those audiences may change slightly, but if we remain focused on the big picture selling propositions or value propositions for a hotel, it's really going to put ourselves in a position where we can deploy things more quickly.
Absolutely. And I think that the office hours this week, bring some of these examples, bring some of what you're working on, and let's work through it together, because I think that sometimes just having, that outside perspective of someone else who's, not intimately familiar with your brand. And, I think sometimes too, as commercial strategists, we fall victim to, we've done this before, it didn't work last time, or we always do it this way, and we gravitate towards, what we're comfortable with and what we know. And so I do think there's value in, sometimes getting that outside perspective, and even someone who has isn't intimately familiar with your property. You think of some of those types of relevance, what to us might be immediately apparent or intrinsically known is not necessarily to the guest. And so there is maybe an opportunity to leverage that that USP better, or help to refine that message or the placement of that message, depending on what stage of the buyer journey someone is in. Awesome. I think Mike's on mute.
Nope. I was saying, do you just want to give us a quick overview on next week, what people can look forward to?
Yeah, absolutely. So super excited. Next week we've got Amy Infante coming from GetGo. So Amy is going to be looking at our direct sales pipeline, so our B2B sales process. And really, when we think about that buyer journey that we looked at back here, how we how we're driving awareness and really getting out and farming that demand from a transient perspective, she's going to be talking to us about how we can do that from a group perspective, or business travel and some of those direct relationships that we have. So I would really encourage you, for those of you who have sales leaders, they don't have to participate in the whole thing or the whole course. If they're not in the whole 8-week course, they're more than welcome to join us just for next week. But I think that it'll be a really informative presentation, and she brings some a new way of looking at prospecting and driving that demand to get out ahead of that business, and help us really to to advance those conversations with our customers with that goal of, EBITDA growth overall.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, and thank you, Andres, for your feedback and joining us today. We appreciate everybody's time and look forward to connecting next week.